Listeners, readers, welcome to the Foxed Page, where we dive deep into the very best books. I'm Kimberly Ford, one-time adjunct professor at Berkeley, best-selling author and PhD in literature. This is the second installment of this new thing I'm doing, where I'm sharing certain ideas that I've come across that I just am absolutely captivated by and that I want to share. The first one was about the fact that English has this double vocabulary. We have all of these words from Latin, and then we have a whole bunch more that come from the Anglo-Saxon. So much like the interview with Lydia Davis that led to the first installment of these talks, I was listening to a podcast when the most amazing thing was brought to the light. This was the 10% Happier podcast with Dan Harris. Love it. Can't get enough of it. He had a woman on named Annie Murphy Paul. She has a book called The Extended Mind. And in it, there is a very small section where she talks about gesture. I'm suddenly becoming very conscious of it. Those of you on YouTube can see that I am, in fact, making some gestures. I don't think gesturing is something that I had thought a lot about. But when you take a tiny step back, you realize that gesturing is a whole mode of communication unto itself. So obviously the definition of gesturing is to communicate using your hands. You can also obviously do things with your head that is also gesturing, anything with the body. And of course, some of these things are very obvious and carry enormous weight. Things like nodding or shaking your head or pointing at an object. I mean, those are very obvious ways that gesture is really communicating something very clear and largely universal among humans. Nodding, pointing at an object, shrugging, putting your hands up and pushing them away. But there are ways that gesturing can be much more subtle. There's actually been quite a bit of psychological studies on gesturing, but really it was Annie Murphy Paul who just kind of sucked me into this concept. So she makes the point in there, it's a relatively foundational point, a relatively obvious one. I am so fixated now on what my hand is doing. The point that she makes is that gesturing is our first language. You can imagine that back, with the caveman, even before language, that gesturing would be a very important part of expressing something, which is just kind of crazy. It's crazy that there's this whole language that we have and this whole system of emphasizing and clarifying that really truly came before language. We also know that it comes before language because of the fact that lots of babies do it. My kids, I did not go in for that. I didn't go in for a lot of sign language. There was that thing that babies do where they put their little, all their little fingertips together and they touch their hands, which I think means more. There's also kind of universal things like when kids stand in front of you and put their arms straight up in the air, it's pretty clear that they want you to pick them up. You can get pretty far just by gesturing. It also, if someone's really far away and you can't speak with that person, you can use gesture in order to communicate certain things. There's that thing where you make that little writing in the air gesture when you're wanting to contact a server to have your check. There was that thing in that movie Trainwreck about how you really can't both say check please and write the thing. I disagree. I always end up doing both. Which may be just because I'm so fanatical about language. I'm just wanting to express myself in every way I can. But I do not have a problem with softly saying, check please, while I am scribbling in the air. And of course, along with this idea that this was our first language, that becomes very clear when you are speaking with someone who does not speak your language. I taught high school right as soon as I graduated from college. I taught Spanish and English, 11th grade English. I got to teach the American novel. God, it was so great. But so when I was teaching Spanish, part of the pedagogical thing, one of the tricks that I had learned in some sort of workshop was to have the students do things with their bodies. If you say, levántate, and then, you would have a student stand, or you would say, siéntate, and then they would sit down. And I kind of was that's so dumb. I just didn't actually think it was very effective. Maybe because it's somewhat limited. I mean, there are not that many things that you can have students act out when you are first beginning to teach them Spanish. Now that I'm saying that, I'm not even sure that's true. You could mime a lot of stuff. And then she goes on, Annie Murphy Paul, to talk about how this language can be symbolic, things like pointing to something. And then there are gestures that are beat gestures, which I think is a lot of what I am doing. Movements of the hand or with the head, which I'm doing both of, that are helping to engage the listener, ideally. And the craziest thing that she said is that it turns out they have good studies that show that our gestures come just milliseconds before our thoughts. We kind of think of them as just this kind of add-on that doesn't really communicate the basic idea that you're trying to get across. But it turns out that our gestures are really important in many ways because they actually help you think. They help you. Wow, they're not helping me right now. They help you bring language and thought to the fore in a way that's very powerful. Annie Murphy-Paul talked about a study where when they made people sit on their hands, that they were much less articulate and they were less fluent, which honestly, I mean, I have been recording these lectures in front of the screen for YouTube ever since I started, and the gestures are crazy. And it makes perfect sense to me that they might be, helping me get my thoughts across. And the other thing that gestures do, which is like so miraculous to me, is that they can convey unspoken thought. And in situations where a gesture is standing in for language, that makes perfect sense. Like when a toddler puts their arms up in the air, that is an unspoken thought. They want you to pick them up. But they also have studies that prove that people use their hands to convey a lot of stuff that goes along with what they're speaking, but might be like a supplement to it. And these are sort of unspoken thoughts. You know, my dog just jumped up on the couch, and it actually makes me think animals. You know, there's a lot of gesturing that we do with animals, and they do a lot of gesturing. That is a very effective way to communicate without words. I'm very pleased with that. That did not come up. Gestures did not come up in any of the things that I have read about it. She actually had a very practical thing, which I appreciated, which is that when you are on a Zoom call, maybe just sit a little further back so that people can see you gesturing and so that you feel free to gesture. It's also the reason why, you guys, sometimes I'll be painting my fingernails like 5 minutes before I hop onto these lectures. And sometimes the fingernails up close look really bad. But it shows that I'm actually paying attention to the way that my hands look on the camera. I'm going to hit you with just a couple more astonishing facts about gesture. One is that people who are congenitally blind, so people who've been blind from birth, they automatically use gestures, hand gestures. They're obviously not seeing that, but it goes to show that it is helpful in terms of expressing yourself. There are also all of those studies where we have these difficulties with mixed signals. Like if it's very hard to say like no while you're nodding your head and to say yes while you're shaking your head. I'm shaking my head. Yes, I actually can do that. But it's odd. One time when my kids were in middle school, I don't know how they gave me this job. This is a very bad job for me. But I was at the score table in a basketball game, and one of the referees asked for like the points of someone, and I was saying the number 4, but I was holding up the number 3. And so I kept saying to him 4, 4. And I was like, why is this guy not getting it? And then I realized, obviously, that I was sending 2 completely different messages. I got to thinking a little bit about all of these different gestures. And I was thinking that, Americans tend to be like super self-congratulatory and kind of righteous about the fact that everyone should speak English and that everyone does speak English. I think it's really kind of an ugly thing. But I was wondering about these hand signals and how international they actually are. So the one that I thought of was thumbs up, because it does seem, I don't know why that seems kind of universal to me. I did a little research, and in the United States and through most of Europe, it does mean like, yeah, good, we're a go. But there are places in West Africa, in the Middle East, and in South America where it's like a grave insult. I also wanted to know how far back these things went, and it turns out like the thumbs up gesture, although they did say in my research that this is apocryphal. So what I'm about to say is not actually true, but the rumor is that it came from ancient Rome, and not only that, but it had to do with the fate of the gladiator. So, whether or not it came from ancient Rome and whether or not it had to do with gladiators, the fact that we think that and that there's a rumor circulating about that does indicate that this is a very long-standing gesture. The other thing about the thumbs up that is so interesting to me is that we use it digitally. It's, like if you're on a Zoom or whatever, you can do like a little thumbs up. And you can kind of extrapolate from that, and just like emojis in general, all of the emojis that are hand signals are really speaking. A facial expression is a different thing, but it goes to show the powerful communication of gesture. I also had one other assumption about gesturing that I wanted to check out. I think if you think for 1 second about international gesturing, I wonder if the thought that you have is the same thought that I have. I'm so fixated right now on what my hands are doing. I'm doing like my fingers on my thumbs, which is actually amazing, because what this is like, it's like a chef's kiss, is it? Yeah, it is. It's like a chef's kiss, and that comes from Italy. So my question and my assumption is one that I think is long held, which is that Italian people gesture a lot more. I almost just said gesticulate, and that is actually very apropos, because the difference between gesturing and gesticulating is that when you're gesticulating, there's more passion, there's more energy, things are a little more enthusiastic. They did a study comparing people in Italy and people in Sweden, and the people in Italy used twice the amount of hand gestures as compared to the Swedish people. There are a couple of really interesting theories about that. One is that there were tons of dialects in Italy, So in order for people to communicate, you would need to have, some universal hand signals. Again, super fixated here on my own hands. The other theory, which is interesting to me, is that they would have these markets and it would be very, very loud. And because of the volume of what was happening around you, you needed some sort of gesture to kind of bolster whatever you were trying to do at the market. And honestly, toward the end of this little talk on gesture, I've become so enamored of gesture. I've just become so interested in it. So I want to just tip my hat. I'm literally making a tip my hat kind of gesture, but I'm going to tip my hat to the Italians because not only is it an excellent Romance language, but they are making very good use of a tool, of a system that is very effective in terms of cognition, self-expression, communication, all of these different things. And the very last thing I'm going to say, I always try to relate these things back to literature. It is very difficult to describe a gesture. People do it in literature, and it always feels kind of clunky, unless it's one of these very well-known ones, like shrugging or nodding or thumbs up or flipping someone off. It makes sense to me that it would be difficult to describe because gesture is in place of language. I was going to read a couple of examples of gesture, but then when I went and looked at them, they were either really clunky or, because I think I have very good literary taste, there wasn't a ton of gesturing in the few books that I grabbed. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. I hope the next time that you are talking with someone and they are really using their hands to express themselves, that you can think a little bit about the fact that those gestures might be coming before the speech and the fact that they are making it easier for that person to communicate with you. And also just appreciate the way that we are so tuned to this whole system of communication that most of us don't think about at all. So that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much for listening. Happy reading.